Ritual of Assalamu Alaikum, which is the universal greeting of peace that Muslims use throughout the world. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered on today, the Manal people of the land on which we meet, and I want to pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and indeed any faith leader or people from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities that are here today. Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful space. I do a lot of work with the Uniting Church in Melbourne, so I feel quite privileged to be in Canberra today, working on or speaking about a very important topic, family violence. I want to also pay my respects to victim survivors in the room. And some of this content is quite heavy. I cannot support you from up here. This is an awareness campaign. I only have 25 to 30 minutes to speak about a big topic that I usually run 3-day workshops about. But it's a conversation starter nonetheless. And if you feel like some of this information is having the penny dropped or is triggering you, please advise the person next to you if you need to go out and have some fresh air. Just do what you need to do to look after yourself. So with the 25 or 30 minutes that I have, I thought I'd start off talking about faith communities before I go and delve into the definition of family violence, the cycle, the power and control wheel, etc., because my colleague Delia will be all over that if I run out of time. Okay, so family violence has no colour or particular face. It doesn't discriminate, it has no borders, it doesn't discriminate against ethnicity, culture, religion, sexism, ageism, socioeconomic class. It is a global crisis. And how do we know the problem exists in faith settings? Okay. The Victorian family, first of all, it's due to the bravery of victim survivors coming out and speaking about their experiences. And in Victoria, they ran a royal commission in which there was 227 recommendations. Of those items, 163 and 165 are related to faith communities. And it is recognised that for women of faith, and I am using very gendered language here. I understand that in the family violence, intimate partnership, relationship sphere, we tend to use she for victim and he as the person using or choosing to use those violent behaviours because of the statistics and evidences available and are undeniable. And I will speak about that in a minute. I will try and use person experiences abuse and person choosing the abusive behaviour. But if I get it wrong, please forgive me. It is not intentional. Okay, so with regards to the faith spaces, we often hear from victim survivors, and I work in this space quite a lot on a daily basis. Victim survivors that are from faith backgrounds tend to want closure. It's not enough for them to get their divorce from the Australian courts. We need to feel that our faith communities are accepting us and have given us that space to move forward. And whether it's the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity or Islam or indeed any other religion, there is no religion that promotes violence against any member of its community. However, I guess the interpretations are open to interpretation, and it depends on who is interpreting the texts and how it is received. Yet education is the key to move forward in the prevention of violence of women and children. So quite often when women do go to faith leaders, there's victim blaming, there's no validation, they're accused of lying, they're told to be good women or good wives and to go back home and to think of the children. women are often questioning themselves, and it usually takes a woman 7 to 15 times to actually leave a violent relationship. She needs to have her faith leader understand that this is not an easy decision for any of us going through this. Quite often, we love the person that is committing the abuse. We just want the violence to stop. And sometimes the statistics speak for themselves. One woman dies a week, on average, at the hands of an intimate partner, former or present, and that is so understated because these are stats that can be really looked back and found a link to the violence. But what about the woman that's driving erratically on the road to escape the violence? What about a woman that's been 5 years in her divorce, but yet there's still financial abuse, or the children are being used, or she's being threatened or stalked? No one's counting those figures. What about some overdoses of a victim survivor that no one can link to family violence? So this figure of 1 a week, I would say, is really underestimated. Along with the 2 women that are hospitalised every week with serious brain or physical injury. I'll get to the stats in a little bit. So many reports have highlighted that many victim survivors of faith do not feel supported by mainstream services. They often cite having to repeat their story, there's lack of empathy, there's bias and judgmental responses towards their faith and faith practices. The cultural and religious beliefs are not taken into consideration when reaching out to mainstream services, and there's a lack of respect for many religious symbols. There's also a lack of availability with regards to prayer areas or understanding in general around religious and cultural practices. The diverse nature of our faith communities can lead to challenges for advocates. Some cultural norms and the, I would say, deliberate misinterpretation of certain texts may lead to an increased propensity towards domestic violence in certain sectors of the faith population, in which sometimes religious practices may appear oppressive when they're taken out of context, when little bits and pieces are pulled out to suit someone's agenda, but yet it will represent different values and beliefs that are not necessarily oppressive in and of themselves. Women in general struggle with similar challenges and dilemmas. However, women of faith have extra barriers in accessing services and also with regards to internal fights. Are people going to believe me? What does God say if I'm going to seek a divorce? All that shame and guilt that's reeled with someone leaving a relationship, sometimes it also translates in having to leave their faith community. And some women don't want to go down that path. So how are we accommodating them as faith leaders and active community leaders? What room are we giving them? In addition to struggling with spiritual questions, we also have to deal with some societal issues, such as the shame of being a divorced woman or being a woman who has reported her husband to the police. They may be reluctant to turn to shelters due to the misconceptions that their children will be taken away, or that the shelters will report undocumented persons, or that the negative perception of minority groups, such as Muslims, will be perpetrated or being discriminated against, which I have heard stories firsthand of discrimination happening within shelters. And sometimes there's drug and alcohol issues as well. All children are teenagers, so they're not accepted in shelters. So a woman is weighing up all these factors before she actually thinks, I need to leave the relationship, it is too dangerous. At the moment, I'm working on a conversation for faith leaders. We recognise that faith leaders are doing so much for their communities presently, and sometimes They are expected to know about everything and be available 24/7. The truth of the matter is faith leaders are underpaid and overworked, and they need some support. And hence my grant that I got from the government to work on a conversation kit that will enable faith leaders to recognise, respond and refer victim survivors or people that are in violent situations, and also how to talk to a person that is choosing to use that violence. Hopefully this will be out by the end of March, or at least a draft, and it will be circulated. It is in consultation with WIRE and also 5 faith groups. The Catholic Diocese, Christian, Sikh, Buddhist and Muslim communities are all involved. It is not going to have any religious content in it, apart from some case studies, because sometimes violence plays differently throughout different cultures and different faith settings. So there will be case studies. However, it's about how do we listen, how do we validate, how do we affirm someone's experience, how do we believe them, how do we support them, how do we empower them by giving them the opportunity and referral pathways in order to help them make informed decisions about their own life, because ultimately they are the expert in their own life. They know how to keep themselves safe. It's not about telling someone you've got to leave. They know how to navigate safety. Indeed, for some women, safety is to stay, because the violence will perpetuate if they choose to leave. So for now, it is safer for them to stay in that relationship. It's about allowing that person that's experiencing the violence to know that they have someone there to talk to should they need to, that there is support out there should they want it. And one day they will come perhaps and have that conversation. How are we ready? And education is the way to get ready. So responses have been quite varied. Like a woman might go to a faith leader, be invalidated, be told be a good wife, good woman, go back home. And on the other side of the spectrum, she might find a faith leader, an imam, a priest, a minister that will say, hang on a minute, safety is paramount. Let's talk about safety, let's talk about a safety plan. If I were you, I'd go to the police. I'd ask for welfare checks. I'm thinking about the children. Should we get child first involved? Should we get an intervention order involved? How can we keep you safe? Because safety is paramount. He might end up organising with the community, or she might end up organising with the community, a family, to take in that woman and her kids for a few days until she can get herself right. And I've seen this happen time and time again. Sometimes in Victoria, as a grassroots worker myself, I don't have time to wait for safe steps, to wait for any of these organisations to mobilise a taxi and do an assessment. Woman needs help now. So there are family members' houses that have been opened for women and children until we can get professional services involved. How can you all be on the same page where this is the response of community as a whole? We say that it takes, a village to raise a child. It certainly takes a community, a healthy, thriving community, to eradicate violence against women and children. We need men on board. We need fathers to be great role models. We need mothers to understand the gendered constructive norms that are not healthy. Sometimes we say to our boys, don't act like a girl, don't cry like a baby. And we are not allowing men the space to show emotions. In 2030, the highest health issue is going to be mental health. The highest suicide rate in Australia are from men, 15 years and older. Confusion. Who are they? Modelling certain behaviours. How are we raising our children? What messages are we giving them with our tongue and also with our action? Is mum always in the kitchen? Is mum being told what she can and can't do? Children learn by modelling. Let's try and model respectful behaviours. So some commonly asked questions by women of faith are, with Islam specific, as I am, identify as a woman of Muslim faith, what does Islam say about ending abuse? Islam holds its followers responsible for speaking out against injustice and doing whatever is possible to end all forms of oppression. The Quran reminds victims of oppression that if they are powerless to end the oppression, God's earth is vast enough to find a place free from oppression. And I think that's very reminiscent with a lot of other faiths as well. I just was given the 5 minutes and I'm not even a quarter of the way through my presentation. Okay, so I guess I'd like to play for you the drivers, what researchers found are to be the drivers of family violence.
This is the story of a boy and a girl. It's a universal story and an Australian story. It's a story that occurs every 2 minutes, in fact. A story that happens 657 times a day, every day of the year, and in every kind of household and every city and region across Australia. This is the biggest story behind violence against women. This story doesn't have a happy ending. Because this is the story of how gender inequality contributes to the murder of one Australian woman almost every week. Sounds like a tall tale, right? Let's take things back to the start. Here's the story of a regular woman. As a girl, she gets told how pretty she is, never how clever she is, that if she wears a short dress, she's asking for it. She grows up and gets used to being harassed by men on the street. That's just the way it is. Here's the story of a regular man. As a boy, he learns that women aren't equal to men from a very early age. Even though both his parents work, on the weekends his mum does the housework while dad watches sport. When he cries about being bullied at school, his dad tells him to stop being such a girl and just punch him right back. Technically speaking, we'd say that these social norms, practices and structures have shaped both the boy and the girl, creating a society where women are valued less and men are expected to be dominant and in control. In such a world, disrespect and hostility is excused and violence against women is far more likely. But back to our story. The girl grows up into a woman, the boy grows into a man, and they begin to date. He jokes that he hopes she doesn't get fat now that we're together. She's not sure whether she should laugh. They have the same education and do similar work, yet he earns more money. He's quickly promoted, like other men in the company, while she gets overlooked. At home, she does all the household chores, and he takes control of their joint finances, seeing as he's the main breadwinner and all. When they're at the pub, he puts her down in front of his mates. His friends stay quiet. In the morning, he wakes up and blames the alcohol. And stress, he always has an excuse. When she gets pregnant, her boss says she can't come back part-time. After the baby is born, the lack of flexible job opportunities and childcare keeps her out of the workforce. She is socially isolated and financially dependent on him. He controls decision-making, and her. They are not equals. She is dependent on him for everything. So she never tells anyone that he has started to hit her. She doesn't say anything to her family or friends. She grows more isolated. She has nothing else but him. So she lives with the violence until their story ends, one way or another. This story isn't a one-off. It's a story shared by 1 in 4 Australian women who have experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or former partner. And it's a story of 1 in 5 women since the age of 15 who experience sexual violence, including rape, 1 in 4 emotional violence, and 1 in 3 women physical violence. But it's also a story that affects children. More than half of the women who experienced violence had children in their care when the violence occurred. For victims and perpetrators, violence against women is the conclusion often reached after a life lived in a society where women and men aren't treated equally. But we You and I can change the narrative. Better education, policies, practices, support and funding can prevent this all too common story. When women and men have equal power, value and opportunities in relationships and in society, violence against women is less likely. By nurturing caring, respectful and equal relationships, and by creating equitable and inclusive communities, workplaces and institutions, we can create a society of equality and respect, where violence against women is unthinkable. Let's change the story, because ending violence against women starts with gender equality.
Okay, so just before I wrap up, the statistics I was mentioning, 95% of all victims have identified the perpetrator as male. Whether they're female or male victims, the perpetrators are always male. Women tend to have the violence perpetrated against them in their own home and usually by someone they know. Like I said, either a partner, a former partner or a current partner. The men's violence is usually by another male and usually in a social setting. It is a one-off incident, whether it's at a pub or at a party or what have you. Men do not walk around in fear after this incident, whereas women are more likely to walk around in fear both during a relationship and after a relationship has ended. Does that make sense? So even out of the 11%, like 89% of femicide, the other 11%, yes, women have been known to also have violent reactions to men or to have violent behaviours. However, 6% of those are women defending themselves. I'm not saying women do not have violent capabilities. Absolutely they do. However, the overwhelming statistics show that 95% of victims have reported males as the perpetrator. Children, sometimes women say, he's a lousy husband, but he's a great dad. I've heard this all too often. How can he be a great dad if he's subjecting the mother of the children to the abuse? Child abuse is not just witnessing. Children do not have to be present to experience the violence. Just to come home and feel the tension, broken wall, mum's crying, there's tension in the air. Even unborn children are impacted by violence in the home. It has long-term social, emotional, neurological, psychological impact on these children. Some reports say it takes 10 years of their life, of a child's life. I know that Delia is going to continue with the power and control wheel, perhaps, and other facts around family violence. Thank you for your time. My time's up.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge that we are on the land of Manal people and their continuing custodianship of this land, which has never been ceded. And I note in the room former Senator Gary Humphries. Welcome, Mr. Humphries. On stage, yes, Mr. Yes. Or Justice. Yes. So, we've got some interesting questions before us about why doesn't she just leave? It's pretty complex. It's not a simple answer to a very, very complex situation. But being a former police officer, I'm going to start from a position of a little bit of background information. I hope I'm clicking this forward. Okay. From our perspective within the Uniting Church, and when I speak from a faith perspective, I'm speaking from within the Uniting Church because that's my current bailiwick. In 2016, we conducted a one-day conference at the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture over at Barton called For Such a Time as This. And at that time, that was a conference that was done in conjunction with the Anglicans and with the Catholics. So we ran a workshop, and there were some regional workshops and discussions took place around the presbytery or the diocese of the Canberra region. And at that time, we had a wonderful woman within the Uniting Church, Ranjini Rivera, who has done a lot of work in writing about faith and has done a lot of work for women in church and the World Council of Churches. And she helped us to produce this book. Speaking to her in the last couple of weeks, we're going to reproduce this because it's 4 years old. The stance of the church has changed considerably, and what we will be doing is inserting some updates in the stories in this. So there's scriptures, there's questions and reflections, there's stories about violence in the Bible, and there's obviously some information about support services and so forth. But we're going to update it with the information and the stance that has come from the Uniting Church from its 15th Assembly in 2018. So there's been a lot of changes also enacted within domestic violence legislation in the last few years. And with those changes of legislation, there were also law reform seminars that were conducted by Legal Aid, ACT and a number of other bodies to give the workers on the ground in the ACT the information they need regarding what had happened with the changes for 2016 under the new Domestic Violence Act, and the Act itself was enacted in 2017. So the Act took a preamble that changed things to more of a human rights framework and giving recognition to the fact that domestic violence in any form, family violence in any form, is a violation of human rights. And the justice system needs to do more to protect and respect all human rights in accordance with the Human Rights Act of 2004 and in conjunction with international law. And family violence, of course, is best addressed through coordinated legal and social responses. You can't operate one without the other if you want to properly protect and safe plan for those who are impacted upon by violence. You have to have all of the arms of the law and the justice system working together alongside with the Domestic Violence Crisis Service. An example of what would happen here is someone makes a phone call to the police to say that there is a possible domestic violence matter occurring in a home. The police would respond and confirm whether it is indeed a family violence matter. During the process of police driving to that location to respond, the Domestic Violence Crisis Service will receive a telephone call from the Police Operations Centre telling them one of our patrols is going to this address in this suburb. We will confirm with you that it's a family violence matter. So Domestic Violence Crisis Service will go and park up the street and wait to find out if indeed it is a family violence matter. The police can go in, take control of the situation and give an invitation to the persons concerned as to whether they want the support of the Domestic Violence Crisis Service. If they have an excuse, oh no, don't worry, it's too difficult, the police can then say, well, we'll just go on the street, we can bring them in. And so that's giving the support right from the very beginning. Also, the support happens in such a manner that there is a full body of different agencies looking at case management, and there is a fast tracking case management system to ensure that the women, the children, or even male victims, if that is the case, are receiving the support that they need from all of the services immediately. Okay, so there's been some changes also regarding a lot of the preamble and recognition of the full features of family violence. So these recognised features are some of the things that were spoken about previously by Manal, that anyone can be a victim. It doesn't matter how old, what age, what gender, what culture, what your ability is, your ethnicity, your religion, your sexual identity. And of course it does once again reinforce that the statistics are prominently men that are committing violence against women. But family violence is also beyond physical violence, and it can involve a lot of exploitation and power imbalances and some very insidious patterns of behaviour of abuse that can last for decades. And of course the preamble in the new legislation gives much more credence to the fact that children are exposed, they are vulnerable, and the consequences of that exposure can be very, very serious. So the key changes for our legislation in the ACT means that there is a broader range of behaviour that is included within the definition of family violence. Okay. Under the old legislation, there was a little bit about harassing and offensive behaviour, but that has been expanded upon quite considerably to include a lot more of the behaviours that you would see in the Duluth model of power and control related to family violence. So family violence can be physical violence or abuse, it can be sexual violence or abuse, it can be emotional or psychological, it can be economic, it can be threatening behaviour, and it can include coercion or any behaviour that controls or dominates the family member and causes the family member to feel fear for the safety and the well-being of themselves, their family members or another person. And there's additional little section here about behaviour that causes a child to hear. They don't have to see, they can hear, witness or otherwise be exposed to family violence or the effects of family violence. So they don't have to see mum being hit, but they can know that mum is in fear. And that fear can be very pervasive and very inhibiting for a person to be able to live a full life in regards to their human rights, going back to the preamble of the Act. Okay, and again, family violence can also be committed by any member in the family, because it's not just intimate partner violence, it can include any member of the family. And again, that includes behaviours that can be sexually coercive behaviour, damaging of property. It is possible to be arrested for damaging your own property when you're tearing a house up during having an argument. It's criminal damage. It is often one of the, I guess attributes isn't the right word, but one of the behaviours that can be part of family violence is harming the pets, harming your animals. And sometimes leaving a situation is dictated by a person saying, I wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't leave my dog. He'd kill my dog or he'd strangle my cat. Those sorts of things are quite common and are amongst the reasons why a person won't leave a domestic violence relationship, because they don't want the animals or the children to be hurt. Stalking is very much a part of domestic violence. Stalking can be physical, or it can be electronically these days. So your phones are a tracking device for a partner who wants to find you. Turn off all those location things on your phone. Turn off those find my phone things, all of those sorts of applications where you can be tracked. Shut down your Facebook, do all of those sorts of things, because they are one way to be found and tracked. Another huge part of the newest legislation for us is the economic abuse that occurs. So that economic abuse can be controlling all of the money, not having any access, only being given $50 a week to feed 5 children with, not being able to buy anything extra, or even if you do earn an income, not having any control over your own income at all. I've known women who have waited for a very long time for the opportunity to escape. They've been squirreling away $5 a week and cutting back on the amount of food that they eat themselves so that they have an ability to have some money in pocket so that they can run. Thankfully though, you can seek money from via Centrelink, and there are emergency funds that can be given to people who are fleeing violence. The financial control can be quite insidious the way it occurs. Some of the examples that we have up there is stopping someone from having access to money to meet normal expenses, being punished because you didn't get the right groceries in the cupboard, but it didn't matter if you didn't have the money to buy it. You're still blamed. Stopping family members from trying to get employment is another form of financial control. Forcing people to sign legal documents like powers of attorneys or signing off on loans. I have known women who have walked away from relationships that had a pile of debt against their names because their exes signed them up for loans and other things, or made them go guarantor for things that they've been left without, and they've had to start all over again with less than nothing because they're in debt. And that sort of abuse also includes tormenting, intimidating, harassing, and offensive behaviour. And quite often within the parent control, you know a person's in trouble when there are no social boundaries anymore, when they can't go shopping and be a normal family shopping, they're being yelled at and screamed at because the boundaries have become blurred because of the violence and the power and control that that person now wants to exercise, even in public place, because they've got no fear of consequences normally anymore. They've lost that fear of consequences. And for people who are of faith, one form of punishment that I've observed is not being able to go to their normal church service or to their Friday prayers, or to have those sorts of discussions that they'd like to have with their imam or their minister because they're so controlled. They're not allowed to have a conversation with anyone else without the partner being present and watching and listening to every step of the way. A lot of family violence modelling comes from the Duluth model from Minnesota in the 1980s from America. The Minnesota model has been designed over the years to take accountability away from the victim in asking them to make a mistake. More often these days, police will have equipment and phones and things. They will take all the evidence at the time, and it won't matter if a person who's been subjected to family violence wants to make a complaint or not. police officer here in the ACT can observe the evidence in front of them, take photos, gather the evidence, and they can go ahead and arrest that person, remove them from the home, put them into custody till a period court the next morning. The emphasis is taken off the person who has been the victim of the violence. It's all on the police, so that the victim then can't be pressured later on to have their statement withdrawn and to go back into the relationship if they don't want to. So the Duluth model has several different varieties and iterations depending on the type of violence, but this is pretty much the standard one. It's power and control will, using privilege, economic abuse, coercion, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimalising, blaming and bullying, and using the children to have all the power in the relationship against the other half that they want to exercise the power over. This is pretty much what the cycle of violence looks like. And it happens over and over and over and over and over and over again. Normally, like every relationship, you meet someone. You start off in your honeymoon phase of getting to know each other, going out, dining, doing all of the things that make a relationship. And everything seems normal for a while. Then things will get to a point where there'll be a build-up phase and there is an increase in tension. And sometimes they will turn into a standover phase where control and fear starts to happen within a relationship. And then there is the explosion, the act of violence. Then there is remorse. And then he starts to pursue you again, to go back into that honeymoon period. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. If only this had happened, or if only you hadn't have done this, if you had been nicer to me, I wouldn't have exploded. So they go back into the honeymoon stage. And normally after many and many iterations of this cycle of violence, the woman might leave. But on average, it'll probably take up to about 15 years. And in the meantime, their whole life is walking on eggshells, not knowing what is going to happen next. Just some myths about domestic violence. Of course, it's not all about heterosexual relationships. Domestic violence can happen in LGBTI communities as well. When I first started doing work within the domestic violence field as the family violence sergeant for ACT policing back in the 2000s, at that stage they didn't have a lot of figures. They were saying that perhaps it was about equal, perhaps less, but in fact we're now starting to find out that LGBTI communities, family violence is just, or domestic intimate partner violence is just as prevalent, or in some instances worse, depending on the situation as to whether a partner is out. They can be manipulated and those sorts of things can be used as coercion. Of course, amongst the myths, as was touched on earlier, of course women can be violent. And some myths too are, especially in lesbian relationships, our relationships are better. No, that's not the case. Nobody's relationships are better. Our relationships are relationships, and they are how we make them and how we build them. Things like size and masculinity or butchness or being more feminine, sometimes those things don't matter either. A person can be violent no matter how big or how small they are. And it's not just a heterosexual issue. And we are often sometimes told that there are a lack of appropriate services for men or gay men or transgender victims. The services are there. They just have to be asked about and sought. There are many community organisations that can help support people. Leaving is a difficult thing. There are many phases of leaving. I'm not going to go into them all now, but it takes a lot of time to pre-contemplate, contemplate, deciding to leave, planning to leave, actually leaving. And actually leaving is the time that you're most at risk of violence. It's the most dangerous time. We saw that a week and a half ago with Hannah. She was in the act of leaving. His order had just been served against him and she was completely at risk, and we saw the results of what happened for her and her children. And establishing a new violence-free life is a very hard thing to do. Just quickly, why do people stay? They love the person, not the violence. They continually hope that the person will change. They stay because of fear of retribution. And there's a whole list of no's. Nowhere to go, no money, no supports, no self-esteem, no power. And one of the things that he often used against her is, no one else will have you. Where are you going to go? No one else will have you. That is used quite often. And of course, one of the other things that is used, whether intentionally or not, is a person's faith. The church tells them to stay. The scriptures tell them to stay with their husband and be subservient to their husband. So their beliefs, their minister, all of those sorts of things can be counterproductive in a person leaving. Briefly, the Uniting Church Assembly in 2018 made a big statement about what our faith says about domestic violence. Basically, we repudiate all forms of domestic and family violence. We express God's desire for life-giving, mutually respectful relationships, homes and communities where all people can flourish. We have a commitment to educate our members about the reality of the situation and how they can respond to be people of support and resources and care. And we work within the national child safety policy framework, and we run safe church training programs. Coming up shortly within the ACT, Canberra Uniting Church has been working in conjunction with some women's groups, Safe Shelter, which operates in churches over here, and some other organisations, to establish a sleep bus. Sleep bus will sleep about 20 women in the bus, has space underneath for the pets, because the pets are one of the excuses for women not being able to leave. And the bus will rotate itself around a number of different locations around the ACT where it can park safely, where women can stay. And in particular, we're looking at more women that are becoming homeless in their 50s because of the breakup of relationships, and they have no financial supports. And they may not have been subjected to violence, and they might find it difficult to get into a women's refuge. So stuff like the homeless bus or the sleep bus is very important for where we're going. It's only a snapshot, we still have a long way to go. Perhaps if there's some more questions about those, we can answer those now, as Manal and I sit down with Miriam to answer some questions.
So we have a first question. If you can say your name and who you would like to direct the question to.
So my name's Jessica from Crossroads Christian Church at ANU, and I'll just direct the question to both of you guys. What barriers have you come up against, pastors or community leaders, in terms of your church, or in terms of people not being as well educated as they should be on domestic violence. That makes sense.
Great question. Unfortunately, there's a lot of resistance. I guess it's easier to get a woman to compromise than it is to get a man. So I have found that faith leaders are victim blaming, and I won't say they're doing it intentionally. I believe that this is how they experience the Word of God and how they look at the text and interpret it, that women have to be submissive, women are the ones that compromise, women are the ones that nurture the family, and are pretty much telling women to go back home and be a better wife, be a better mother. What did she do wrong to get him angry? And there's a lot of victim blaming, unfortunately. However, we have come a fair way, and there are some allies that we are using now in presentations and educational workshops to challenge the very verses that are problematic across all faiths.
My experience within the Uniting Church is about this long, and the Uniting Church has been around for 42 years. So I can't say that I've seen personally people who haven't been given support and appropriate pastoral care and those sorts of things from within the Uniting Church from my perspective. But I have heard stories of women having been told in the past to go home and obey their husbands and just be a better wife. I've heard that from others. My experience as a newer person in church and seeing what has been written within the Assembly decision, the commitment of the church to education, understanding, and being pastoral carers and resources for women. And there is also a whole lot of theology behind what the Uniting Church has said. The best suggestion I would have is to go to the Uniting Church of Australia website, look for Assembly 2018 or the 15th Assembly, and go in and have a look at the minutes of the Assembly, Appendix C, page 30 through to 32, gives all of what the Uniting Church has to say about its commitment, its acknowledgement of how pervasive the problem is and what they are committed to doing. That's the best I can do with that.
As a Uniting Church ordained person, the Uniting Church in its institution has been ordaining women right from the beginning. And so probably out of the different faith traditions, and certainly in the Christian tradition, we are probably one of them on the forefront of looking at family violence, and we've also been on the forefront of the Royal Commission and all those things where we are attuned to the diversity of relationships. Yeah. Another question.
Hi, my name is Sandra. My question is for both of you. Manal, you spoke about how faith communities can sometimes respond really quickly, and Delia, you also spoke about a range of things the Uniting Church is doing. Do you see faith communities as being untapped or undertapped resources in addressing DV, or conversely, do you think that help should be sought from other places?
I think faith leaders have a very important role to play within faith communities and the family violence space, specifically because people go to congregations, people go to sermons, they are the first point of contact for a lot of women, and sometimes even men. Well, for example, the Muslim faith, we have a congregation of 2,000 plus members to most mosques on a Friday. It's a great place for messages to be told. It's a great place to advocate on behalf of a lot of social justice issues. But I don't think they're being utilised properly, and I don't think there's the right education. Like, it depends on which mosque you go to, it depends on which imam you talk to. and how they're going to respond to such issues. Sometimes they're doing more damage than good, however, some are trying to do the right thing and getting themselves educated, but we're still not at that baseline where we can have a fundamental, baseline approach in response to women.
I would say that from my observations here within Canberra Regional Presbytery, we've been doing a fair bit of work with safe church education, and we've also wrapped in amongst that some more education around child abuse and grooming. Potentially there is more space for us to do more about domestic violence education. That is why I think it's important that we reprint our book for such a time as this, update it and add more information and more service information to the back of that for contacts. Certainly the ministers that I've seen in action within this presbytery have been very proactive and very supportive of patient care and ensuring that they are looking after anyone that they think might be a victim or impacted upon by family violence. And pastoral care of relationships as well, ensuring that there is those doors open for people to know that go and get some counselling before it's too late, before it becomes a quagmire of violence, before we turn into a volcano and explode. And there are some brochures on the table outside that are from Trauma Women's Refuge, Domestic Violence Crisis Service, and some brochures for change programs for men.
With regards to faith leaders, I think it's important to recognise that we're not all counsellors and we are not all able to try and fix a problem that is so complex and do couples counselling. I think quite often faith leaders attempt to bring couples together in order to understand what's going on, and that really does silence the woman and actually sometimes increases her risk when she goes back home. What did she say? What didn't she say? Body language, eye contact. She's been put in grave danger, damned if you do, damned if you don't type. So I would strongly advise faith leaders to steer away from couples counselling if you are not a counsellor. It is a very tricky space and it is a specialist type of counselling.
That's why I recommend Relationships Australia. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, go away. Yeah.
I would like to ask you a specific question. Violence, domestic violence, when it doesn't work, you're not compatible with your partner, you just disappear. When you are having a neighbor that behaves like if he possesses you and everything that you have is theirs, and he's robbing you, abusing you, stalking you, smashing the place right through, making drugs and providing for the police to be protected for themselves, which I did find quite incredible, but now I'm certain it's the correct thing that I was told by some of the other group of people next door, building and whatever, when they saw and pointed out to me that the windows were covered with foil, and that's when we make drugs. I didn't want to know, didn't want to believe because it was too stupid. But however, that was the case because I have now quite a lot of my documents and clothes staying with drugs that are used in my house. And they're there every day. He's a professional criminal. He forced the lock of the door without a key. And they're there every day. They steal everything, my blanket, my pants, everything they can, my jewelry, my clothes, non-stop. And I can't get any support from the police because they claim no evidence. And this happened since November 2007, and it never stopped. So I don't see the reality between violence is violence. It doesn't matter whether it's sexual violence or neighborhood violence. If they are sick in the head, that's the way they will treat a woman. Because I'm alone, because I'm old, and because I am defenseless. So they can take advantage. They can take everything I have, and that's okay.
You've got a lot of things wrapped up in that. Is it okay if I talk to you afterwards?
Of course.
And to see what we can work through and what we can do to provide you with some assistance. I think that's because you've got a lot going on there.
Sure.
That's all right.
I think your point is valid though. Violence is violence no matter where it comes from, and there is support available, so please follow up with the conversation. Are there any other questions? Yes. Either one. Yep, thank you.
I don't have much to do with children now. I have in the past. I was really touched, sort of about change the story, and I hope, and I'd like verification, hopefully, that there is educational material for parents and for other caretakers of children on how to respect people, each other, no matter what their sex, no matter no matter what they do. I mean, I think it was a good example that was given to say to a little girl, "You're looking pretty," and to a little boy, "Don't cry." You look like a girl when you do that. But sort of as to how much has been done to the children to feel affirmed and have self-esteem in themselves. Okay, I presume that that is part of the strategy, but I'd just like you to emphasise that.
Absolutely, in Victoria, I'm from Victoria, so I can speak for Victoria. There are educational programs happening right across from kindergarten, primary school, high school, university, workshops on respectful relationships, what that looks like. Yes, it's been going really, really well. So yes, change is slow with anything. If you look back at the Quit Smoking campaign, it took over 20 years. But now we've got people not allowed to smoke in public places. And for the first time ever in 2018, there was a decline in men taking up cigarettes. So that's, change is slow. But I look back 30 years of when my parents were here and what domestic violence looked like and the response back then to what it was 7 years ago and where we are today. There is a change, and if you're in the industry you can see change. Unfortunately, sometimes there's misidentification, sometimes things go horribly wrong, our legal system gets it horribly wrong, but nonetheless there is good happening out there and we've got to hold on to hope.
I think that there are similar education programs going on within the ACT with respectful relationships programs. Just to build on something you said, when I was a little kid, my best friends across the road, their parents both drank, and regularly on a Friday night or a Saturday night, she would come to our house to knock on the door to phone the police. And I just wanted to stop because he's been drinking and he will be okay tomorrow, but for now, she would be avoiding this, and that stuck in my head so much from being a child and seeing that violence.
With regards to alcohol and drug, and I wanted to touch on that in my presentation. So, alcohol and drugs are not an excuse and they are not a driver of violence. Alcohol and drug can exacerbate the violence, it can increase the severity or the frequency, but they are not a driver of family violence. Gender inequality is. Whether the patriarchal misogynists sit in the Houses of Parliament or the Houses of God or anything in between, that is the driver. Right?
Can't beat that.
We have a different question. At the back, and then if you would like at the front, yes.
No, there's one.
Go at the back and the mic will come to you. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name's Louise and I'm with ACT Government. Manal, I was interested in the kit that you're pulling together for faith leaders around recognising, responding and referring. We're doing a fairly large piece of work in the ACT about training government workers in the exact same thing, and we'll be looking to expand that into the community sector soon. But there was another thing that you mentioned that kind of raised my awareness, I guess, and I wanted to take your feelings on this, where sometimes a faith leader might step in and provide support and might actually help that individual to actually get out of that position of difficulty. But what their awareness would be around safety planning and risk, and what that might then create in terms of a lack of safety for that individual, and maybe in terms of the training package that you're putting together about where safety planning might be considered.
Thank you very much. Very important question. And yes, the conversation kit that we are putting together is in collaboration with WIRE, Women's Information and Field Exchange. They've put together a lot of documents. However, this is my project from the Department of Premier and Cabinet. It will have a safety plan. It will have the feminist framework on how to recognise, respond and refer with regards to active listening. So step by step, how to ask open questions, how to validate, how to affirm, safety planning, what is the checklist for safety planning, how not to collude with perpetrators, how to ask culturally sensitive questions, simple things like having a box of tissues and a glass of water. Like, it is back to basic on how you would feel respected in a conversation, and being able to lead your own safety plan, being able to talk about what does safety mean to you. Is it staying? Is it family? Is it community? Is it changing your name and moving interstate or overseas? This is an individualised situation, and it will be tackled as such. In the book there will be examples. It's actually going to be a manual, the latest stats, latest best practices, I guess, and broken up into little chapters with practical resources that can be just touched at, on the spot. And it's not just for faith leaders, it's for any active community leader as well.
Thank you. We have...
Just quickly, for those who aren't aware, safety plans are available and can be found by looking at the Domestic Violence Crisis Service website or looking at the AFP, ACT Policing website. You can go in and you can find safety plans, print them off, discuss them with your family members, your children, or whoever are the most appropriate people that are going to help you when you need to implement that safety plan.
And we have time for one more question.
I'll be very quick. I won't even make it a question.
Okay.
I just think something needs to be done about the disparity between state law and federal law, because we've got a family member who's been caught between that, and it's been extremely difficult.
I know within the ACT domestic violence legislation they've created space for a Part 9, and that Part 9 is supposed to link in or be woven in with federal law when all of this comes into being. And it's one big cooperative piece of legislation across the states.
Thank you, a very good question. I think there are lots of gaps in the challenges between what happens in states and what needs to happen across. I've had experience in the child protection area and find similar challenges across those states. I want to thank you both very much for coming and speaking to us and sharing your wisdom and leaving us with more questions than answers, I think, in some ways, to help us to continue to have the discussions, to have the conversation and keep up the good work in the government about seeing where it goes from government into community sector. It is challenging. It is a challenging space. I have supported people through domestic violence, and it's a long journey. And I think the question was asked, can we be a resource in our faith communities? The answer is yes, we can. And it's going to be great when we've got more education about how we become that better resource. So thank you so much for coming along tonight.